Hello everyone, so today I'm bringing you a Top 5 Wednesday. This week's topic is your top 5 favorite science fiction and fantasy novels of all time. Top 5 Wednesday is a Goodreads group run by Sam over at Thoughts on Tombs, which I will leave a link to in the description bar down below. This was tough. Almost my entire collection of books is currently in storage, and so I can't just look at my bookshelves to try to remember everything that I've read. And also my Goodreads is just so not complete. Only a fraction of the books that I have actually read are actually on it. So trying to remember everything I've read is kind of difficult sometimes. And this list is weird. I'm just gonna say that. This list is kind of weird. I don't actually know if it's entirely accurate. And the other thing is several of the books on this list I haven't read in, oh god, more than a decade. So the degree to which I remember enjoying them might not actually match up very well with how much I enjoy them if I read them now. Let me just, how would I just say this? Here is a list of 5 fantasy and science fiction novels that I have really enjoyed in the past. Coming in at number 5 is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I've mentioned this book in a few other lists, including the top 10 books that influenced me as a reader and a writer. I read this book as a kid. I really love it. I have a definite preference for Georgian/Victorian Gothic literature. This novel has vampires in it and a vampire hunter. It's just fantastic. I also remember it being really creepy. If that holds true now, I don't know, but in my head it holds a really special place as being just a fantastically written novel that no movie has done justice to. Coming in at number 4 is a book I read as a kid. It's Martin the Warrior by Brian Jakes. This is one of several books in the Redwall trilogy. This is the first Redwall book I ever read, and it remains to this day my favorite of the series, though I do enjoy several of them. But this is the one about the history of Martin before he comes to Redwall Abbey and his kind of heroic and tragic past. And it's delightful. It's a great introduction to the series, which as a whole is one of my favorite kids series. It's got so much adventure. I mean, it is about a bunch of animals walk and talk like people, but it's got so much swashbuckling and, you know, love and friendship and family. And it's got great food, it's got great songs, it's got really fantastic brain teasers and puzzles. One of the primary themes of the series is solving puzzles to find treasure and stuff like that. It's a great series, and I adored it. Coming in at number 3, and this is a book that I read the first 4 books in this series when I was a kid, and it's a very adult series, and so I'm hesitant to put it on this list because I haven't reread it, and I really don't know how it would hold up to being reread under a critical adult lens. But number 3 is Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. I'm just kind of a sucker for the Dune books, but I think if I read them now, I would probably have a lot to say about the imperialist, religious, colonial nature of the story. But I haven't reread them recently, so I can't effectively comment on it. And it is, specifically Dune Messiah, is a book that both the characters, the plot, and the themes have really, really stuck with me throughout the years. And it's by far my favorite of all of the books, even though I would say it's probably one of the most looked over. I think there's something fascinating about it, because one of the themes in the stories is destiny and being controlled by your genetic destiny. And there's this point in Dune Messiah where Paul Atreides tries to subvert his genetic destiny. And he does it for himself, but then that destiny simply gets picked up by his son in the next book. It's complicated, and it's philosophically interesting to kind of tease through as a reader, or at least I found it really interesting. So yeah. Number 2, and this is appearing kind of high up on my list, but it's also like the book on this list that I have read most recently, and that is Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince / the Deathly Hallows. So I really liked the first Harry Potter book. Genuinely love it. I enjoyed books 2 through 5. They weren't my favorites though. And so, like, for different reasons. Like, some of them I found boring. Some of them I found kind of tedious. I didn't always like the characters that much in some of the other ones. But when I had Half-Blood Prince, man, I just flew through that book. Because it It was all the stuff that was really interesting. Instead of being focused on like Quidditch, it was really focused on the Voldemort Death Eater plot. That was really interesting, and that's why I really liked it. I'm sort of sticking on Deathly Hallows here because for the most part, I also flew through Deathly Hallows. And for the most part, I really enjoyed that book. However, it had a lot more in it that was kind of redundant and a little dry because she had to stretch that book out over an entire school year, and it really, I think for the pacing, shouldn't have been. You know, I don't think that book alone really belongs on the top 5 list, but together, if you put those two books together, because they just have a great plot and they are such a good wrap up of a series, that yeah, I just they're gonna hold a special place in my heart forever, and that's why they're on this list. And see, this is why I say this list is weird, because on here, my number one favorite fantasy and sci-fi novel is so future editor Leah here with the correction. In my original recording, I said my number one favorite science fiction and fantasy novel was The Color of Magic, and I actually meant to say The Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett. And I feel weird saying that, but it kind of is. And I debated with myself whether or not to put this book on the list here or to put Good Omens, but honestly, The Color of Magic has stuck with me more than Good Omens has. I really love Good Omens, and Good Omens probably deserves a place on this list, but I wasn't going to put 2 Terry Pratchett novels on here. So I went with this one instead. Now, this is book 2 in the Discworld series and was accidentally the first Discworld novel I read. I bought this one thinking it was like the first book in the series, and it wasn't. And I read it, and I freaking loved it. And then I went and read the first book in the series, which is honestly not that great. It's okay, but it really, I think this is a common thing people say, is that like Terry Pratchett's Discworld books got better as he wrote more of them, as he started to expand on what he was trying to do with them. And that's really apparent here. Now, books 1 and 2 in the series are like really tightly, they're basically like part 1 and part 2 of a story. So it's really weird to say, yeah, read book 2 and then read book 1, because like you shouldn't, because there's stuff that in book 2 that spoils book 1, but at the same time, book 2 is just leaps and bounds better than book 1. And I really love it. It made me hardcore for life Terry Pratchett fan. It's just, it's fun, it's great, it's a great adventure. It has a fantastic conclusion. Like the climax of that book is just so good. And it's stuck in my head as just one of those amazing book endings. And that's why it's number 1 on this list, even though I don't know, like it's not gonna win any literary awards, but it's a really great book. So that's my really weird list of favorite sci-fi and fantasy. One honorable mention that I really wanted to put on this list, but it got bumped off because of Dracula, and I mean, I don't really know how I feel about it. This is a book that I have not read in a really long time, and that is The Courtship of Princess Leia by Dave Wolverton. It's a Star Wars Extended Universe novel, which actually I'm quite a big fan of those in general. I've read a ton of them. But this one I loved as a kid. I remember reading this book, which is, it's a hefty novel. I read it in one sitting, basically. It's all about how Princess Leia has to marry someone of, I don't think, it's not that she has to marry someone of the nobility, but she has to marry someone appropriate, like politically. And C-3PO somehow fucks up Han's parentage and like links Han really complicated to some long dead Corellian royalty, and the whole story just spins out of control. And I just remember loving it as a 13-year-old. So that's why it's an honorable mention on this list. One of these days, maybe this year, I will reread that book and see if I still love it as much as I remember loving it. And future editing Leah here again to slip in one last honorable mention, which is a book I actually read like a couple of days after filming this video, and that is Radiance by Catherine M. Valente. And really, this novel probably deserves a higher spot on this list, but I don't want to reshoot everything. And for what it is, this list of top 5 favorite science fiction and fantasy novels is kind of a very historical list, taking in kind of the whole history of my reading of the genre. So in that regard, it's pretty decent. So I want to mention Radiance. It is a phenomenal science fiction novel that really blurs the line between science fiction and magical realism and steampunk, and is a great story about story, and I highly recommend it. Let me know what your favorite science fiction and fantasy novel is, or if you've read any of the books on this list, and I'll see you guys all next week. Bye.